You've probably seen the movie Hacksaw Ridge, right? The incredible story of a soldier who went into the thick of World War II without ever carrying a weapon. But what if I told you the real story, the one that actually happened, is so wild, so unbelievable, it makes the movie look tame? Well, let's dive in.
This was the prayer. A simple, quiet plea that became the engine for one of the most unlikely heroes of the entire war. It's a line that tells you everything you need to know about a story of faith and raw courage that, honestly, is hard to wrap your head around.
So that's what we're here to do. We're going to peel back the layers of Hollywood and get to the real-life legend underneath. We're talking about Corporal Desmond Doss, a man whose actual life story was somehow even more dramatic than the blockbuster movie it inspired.
You see, before Desmond Doss ever stepped foot on an actual battlefield, he had to fight a completely different kind of war. This was a war against his own side, a fight for the right to hold on to what he believed in. This was his battle before the battle.
So Doss was what's known as a conscientious objector, and it's a really important idea to grasp here. The key thing is he wasn't trying to dodge the war, not at all. In fact, after Pearl Harbor, he chose to enlist. He wanted to serve, he wanted to be there, but he wanted to do it as a combat medic. His mission was to save lives, not take them.
So where did this unshakable belief come from? Well, it was deeply rooted in his Seventh-day Adventist faith, for sure, but it also came from this really vivid childhood memory. His dad had this framed picture of the Ten Commandments, and the drawing for "Thou shalt not kill" showed Cain looming over his brother Abel. That image just seared itself into his brain. For Desmond, that commandment wasn't a suggestion, it was an absolute.
And holding on to that belief came at a massive cost right from the start. The other soldiers, they just couldn't understand it. They called him a coward, they saw him as a total misfit, he was bullied, cast out, even got into fights. One guy actually told him, "Doss, when we get into combat, I'm gonna make sure you don't come back alive." It got so bad, his own commanding officers tried to get him kicked out, saying he was mentally unfit. They even threatened him with a court-martial just for refusing to pick up a rifle.
But through all of that, he had one person who never, ever wavered, his wife, Dorothy. Before he shipped out, she gave him a small Bible that he carried everywhere. And inside, she wrote this message. It was this faith and her unwavering love that really got him through that first brutal war of wills. All right, so that brings us to the second battle, the one history remembers. After finding and winning the right to serve his own way, Doss is sent to the Pacific, and he ends up in a place that would go down in history, the Maeda Escarpment on the island of Okinawa.
Now, why was this one ridge so important? Well, it was all about location. This escarpment was basically a giant, deadly roadblock on the way to Shuri Castle, which was the main headquarters for the Japanese forces on the island. To win the battle for Okinawa, the Allies had to go through it. There was no going around.
And the place itself, it was just a nightmare. We're talking about a sheer cliff of jagged limestone. It was so brutal, so unforgiving, that the GIs gave it a nickname that just says it all, Hacksaw Ridge. You just knew the fighting there was going to be horrific.
And it was. After the Americans managed to take the top of the ridge, they got slammed by a massive Japanese counterattack. The order came down to retreat, get off the ridge. But Doss, he refused. He stayed, alone, up there in the absolute kill zone. And on that single day, he is credited with saving an estimated 75 of his wounded comrades.
Just picture it. With bullets flying and mortars exploding all around him, he went from man to man, dragging the wounded to the edge of that cliff and then lowering them down one by one, using this special knot he knew. And every time he got one man to safety, he would just whisper that prayer, "Lord, please, help me get one more." Now, this is where the story gets even crazier. The movie, for all its intense action, actually had to tone down what really happened. Apparently, the filmmakers thought that if they showed everything Doss actually did, the audience just wouldn't buy it. They'd think it was too over the top to be true. So what did they leave out? Well, for starters, Okinawa wasn't his first rodeo. He'd already earned 2 Bronze Stars for bravery on other islands, and his heroism didn't just stop that day on the ridge. Later in the battle, he was hit bad by a grenade. When medics came to get him, he pointed to another guy and insisted they take him first. Then, while he's waiting, a sniper's bullet shatters his arm. So what does he do? He crawls 300 yards by himself to an aid station. It took him 5 hours. But maybe the most jaw-dropping story of all came out decades later, from a Japanese soldier who was there that day. He said that he had Desmond Doss, the medic, running all over the battlefield, dead in his sights.
But every single time he squeezed the trigger, his rifle jammed. It just wouldn't fire.
So what happens after the smoke clears? Well, the story doesn't end when the war does. Desmond's courage came with a heavy, heavy price, but it also brought him the highest honor his country could give.
On October 12, 1945, Desmond Doss stood on the White House lawn. He became the very first conscientious objector in American history to receive the Medal of Honor. As President Truman put the medal around his neck, he looked him in the eye and said, "I consider this a greater honor than being president."
But his war, it never really ended. His sacrifice just kept going for decades. He came home with tuberculosis and spent over 5 years in hospitals, eventually losing a lung and 5 ribs. Later, a bad reaction to an antibiotic left him completely deaf. Then, in 1991, he lost his beloved Dorothy in a car accident. He carried these scars, visible and invisible, until he finally passed away in 2006.
When you look at the whole story, it just forces you to ask this fundamental question. Here's a man who was called a coward, but who showed a level of bravery that is almost beyond comprehension. The guy who refused to carry a weapon was armed with nothing but his faith and a little Bible. It just leaves you wondering, where does that kind of courage, where does it actually come from?